Hello, everybody out there in YouTube land, Twitter land, wherever you are on the internet. Thank you for tuning in to an episode of Fighting the Void. This is not our regularly scheduled time, but it is our regularly scheduled format. I am actually talking to a person and not just the camera again. So that is, at least for me, it is an extremely welcome change. I hope you guys find it to be as well, because I have actually one of my favorite Twitter people on today, Margo, at Margo Catholic on the Twitters. And if you are at all familiar with Margo, you know she might be just a little bit passionate about all things Catholic, especially
Just slightly.
pretty much the more trad, the better. It's pretty much how Margo rolls, and that is cool. And we've had a few discussions. I wouldn't go so far as to call them debates, to be honest, but we've had discussions about the merits of the Novus Ordo and the merits of the Latin Mass, which I find it funny that we refer to the Latin Mass in English and the Novus Ordo in Latin.
Well, those different names, like the Latin form of the Latin Mass is the Usus Antiquico. I can't pronounce it.
But the common
form
usage.
Yeah.
The common terms that people use to refer to these, it's like the exact backwards of what
Right.
it probably should be, and I am just personally amused by that fact. And come to think of it, there are lots of things that amuse me about certain aspects of intra-Catholic debates, but they will probably be beyond our scope here today. So before we get into it, though, I got to take care of just a little bit of housekeeping, and that is, as far as regularly scheduled programming goes for Fighting the Void, it's going to be a little bit yet because, as some of you guys know, I am out of town right now. I'm not in my usual domicile in wonderful Michigan. I am, alas, I'm in Wisconsin in a hotel at the moment. stupid work-related things.
Yeah, I thought it looked a little different.
It looks a lot different, and I will say the lighting's probably
No,
better,
where are all the books? I miss all the books.
Yeah, I miss all the books. I did pick up a couple while I was here, but I can't not do it. So it's going to be a little while yet because I get done with this, and then I've got a normal week, but then I'm on nights for another week, and then it's Thanksgiving the week after that. So guess what? And I've got one of my kids has got a first communion in that time frame. So guess what? It's super busy. So there won't be the regularly Saturday scheduled programming just yet, but we've got all kinds of things scheduled for you guys anyway outside of the normal time frame. First, the Fighting the Void network is starting to get rolling. We're kind of slow rolling it yet before like kind of the official launch. And Red at Warlike Fire is relaunching Blunt Talk tomorrow night, and she's going to be interviewing the Censored Rock, who's kind of a. If you've seen the videos on Twitter, that usually just have the only comment is yeet, and it's somebody falling and hurting themselves in horrible fashion, and you feel guilty about laughing at it. That's the guy. And Sunday night, I'm going to have a bunch of the Fighting the Void crowd on the live stream. We're going to be talking about this thing you might have heard of coming up. It's called the election. You may or may not have seen a YouTube ad about it. I don't know. There's just a handful out there. So unless you watch YouTube a whole lot, you probably haven't seen any. And okay, yeah, we all know that's not true. And
Wait, something's happening next week. Something big.
I don't know. It might be on Tuesday, unless you're a Biden supporter, in which case it's definitely Wednesday.
Be careful with that. I made a joke like that.
Yeah.
I think it was for the 2018 midterms, or might have been the 2016 election, and then I got kicked off like Facebook and Twitter for a few days because they were just like, misinformation. No. I'm just like, sorry, it was a joke.
Bring it, Susan. Bring it. Anyway, and so Wednesday, immediately after the election, we're going to have Margo and I's mutual friend Cullen on just to discuss a little bit of what happened. whatever it is that happened, we're going to discuss it a little bit and discuss some basic ideas, suggestions, possibilities as to what might happen going forward. And after that, we'll see. Anyway, first of all, thanks everybody for tuning in. I do see we have a few live viewers, especially Varric. I see over in the chat there. And also feel free as we're going through, because we're going to jump probably right past the basics and right into the deep weeds.
I apologize to all the non-Catholic, my beloved Protestant friends who might be tuning in, who are just going to be very confused.
Yes, I expect much confusions, but so feel free to ask any questions in the chat. Whether you're Protestant or Varric, you're Jewish, so some of it may be completely new to you, although actually for the Latin Mass, less new than you might think.
Yes, exactly.
So, okay, Margo, why don't you, I've been talking for a while, why don't you go ahead and set the basic stage? What is the Novus Ordo? What is the Latin Mass? How do they relate and everything? Set that up for the audience.
Yes, okay. So the Latin Mass, well, let's start with the ordinary form, I guess, which is also the Novus Ordo. It goes by a bunch of names, but it was created actually in the 1960s and early 70s following the Second Vatican Council. So for up until the 1960s, we had in the Latin Rite, and again, this is kind of confusing, but there's different rites of the church. So like there's the Latin Rite, there's the Byzantine Rite, there's the Syro Malabar Rite. I think there's like 21 total different rites in the church, but that just kind of is based on like geography and different cultural things, but they're all in communion with the church. But anyway, the one that we're in, that me and Ginger are in, is the Latin Rite. And so up until the 1960s, there was one form of Mass in that rite, and it was just the Latin Mass. That's just what it was. And it had just been kind of growing and developing all through the centuries. And then all of a sudden in the 1960s, kind of due to some modernism forces within the church. I don't mean modernism as in modern technology. I mean modernism as in like kind of a borderline heresy within the church. There was kind of some that movement within the church, within the hierarchy, and they created this brand new form of Mass within the Latin Rite called the Novus Ordo, which is Latin for new ordo. And so they just brought in all these changes pretty rapidly, I would say. And just a lot of changes, because up until then, the Mass had been always in Latin instead of the vernacular, because Latin was the universal language of the church. It was just the language
technically still is. Yeah,
technically still is, but not as many people. I would say if you poll an average Catholic, they probably would be like, Latin, what's that? But back in the day, before then, most Catholics at least knew enough to somewhat understand what was going on at Mass. But so anyway, Latin was the sole language spoken within the liturgy, except for the homily, which was the exception. The priest would give the homily in English. But so with the Novus Ordo, the Latin changed to the vernacular, meaning the common language, so English in America. They eliminated a bunch of different prayers, and different parts of the Mass were eliminated. Stuff was added, like the petitions or the prayers of the faithful, which are prayed after the Creed and the Novus Ordo. Those were not part of the Mass prior to the Novus Ordo. The priest started facing the people instead of facing east. It was tradition for the priest to face east, which is the doctrine of Jerusalem, which is also to face the tabernacle, where we believe that Jesus Christ is present in the Holy Eucharist. He would, in the Latin Mass, he always faces east. He faces Jesus in the tabernacle, but then in Novus Ordo, he faces the people, which is called versus populum. So that changed, and then they suppressed a lot of the Gregorian chant in favor of more modern songs, I call them.
I'm going to bring up a thing there.
I know. There was still the option for Gregorian chant in the Novus Ordo.
I don't mean just that. I actually mean Vatican II specifically called for extensive use of Gregorian chant.
Extensive use, but how much? Because in the Latin Mass, a lot, but
much more than what you actually hear in your average
much more than what you have,
parish.
why put a limit on it at all? Because all the way up until that point, there was no limitation. It is what that's just what it was.
I would argue that the documents don't put a limit on it. It actually encouraged the use, as far as I can tell.
Well, it didn't need to be encouraged. It was there.
Fair.
It was already there. There was
fair. You can say those words are redundant, but my point is you really can't say that. At least the documents support the idea that it was suppressed. Now you can definitely point to the fact that it is rarely used in your average Novus Ordo parish. You can point to that, and that is 100% accurate. But that didn't come from the actual Vatican II. That came from the spirit of Vatican II, which are two very different things.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, there's the spirit of Vatican II and there's actual Vatican II, but how many people actually follow what it actually said? That
let me jump in. When we talk about the Novus Ordo, we're talking about the Mass in whatever the local language is.
Yes, we're talking about the Mass that was created in the 1960s.
Yes. Well, yeah.
Yes,
well,
it did not exist prior to the 1960s.
I'll let that stand.
Well, it didn't exist. I mean, maybe there was some changes a little bit in the 50s, a little bit, but the Mass itself, the Novus Ordo, did not exist. This is documented history. It did not exist at all. There was one form of Mass before the 1960s.
I'm not, Margo. I'm not arguing that point. That's why
what are you arguing?
I said I would let it stand.
Okay.
so I wasn't intending to argue anything.
Okay.
I could make a counter argument to it, but for the sake of it, that's not the biggest issue at hand here.
Okay.
Because the overall basic structure is the same.
I would question that, because if you put the two side by side, you'll see there's a lot of things all the same. There's a lot of things that are different. In the Latin Mass extraordinary form, whatever you want to call it, there's at the beginning, on Sunday, at High Mass on Sundays, there's the Asperges Me sprinkling rite, where the priest goes around and actually sprinkles the congregation every single Sunday if it's High Mass. And then he goes straight to the altar and prays the Judica Me Psalm, Judica Me Deo, Judge Me, O Lord. He does that. That is not included in the Novus Ordo at all.
I'm not referring to a lot of the specifics. I'm referring only to the rough outline, the skeleton, which is basically the priest comes in. There is scripture that is read. There is a psalm that is sung, and then there's the homily, and then there's the actual liturgy of the Eucharist. That basic structure. Remains.
Yes, but I get into the specifics.
That's why I balk a little bit at the idea that the Mass was just created out of completely thin air. Was it radically changed? Yes, I will 100% give you that.
Okay, if you'll give me the radically changed.
Yeah, yes. Now, I will, and this is just for general audience understanding, if you go to any Catholic parish today, what you are most likely to hear is you're going to hear the Novus Ordo Mass.
Yes,
which
it is still the default.
Yes, it is very much the default. You will, like I say, unless you intentionally seek out a Latin Mass, you are probably not going to find it. You kind of have to want to find it.
Yes.
And they are definitely out there. For many years after Vatican II, they were actually not allowed in the West. I don't know if it was throughout the Western world or it was just the United States. You would probably know more on that.
Yeah, it was. I'm not sure about around the world, but it was definitely. I don't think it was ever technically prohibited. It was a weird thing because of course you get into the SSPX and all that.
I know John Paul II allowed it with kind of like the bishop's permission, if I remember correctly.
But then in 2007, that's where Summum Pontificum comes in from Benedict XVI, where he gave universal allowance of it, where you didn't have to get permission from your bishop or anything. You could just, if you're a priest and you wanted to say the Latin Mass, you can say the Latin Mass.
Yes, which was a very good move on Benedict's part in my mind. Okay, so let's get kind of into. You talked a little bit about a lot of the differences between the Latin Mass and the Novus Ordo, and it is important to say that the Latin Mass really hadn't changed much from I don't know how far you could go back, because obviously the mass was not always in Latin. It was, it would have originally been said in either in Hebrew or Greek, or maybe both.
Right.
In fact, there's still some Greek in the mass. And if you ever walk into any Catholic parish and hear somebody say Kyrie eleison, that's Greek. It's not Latin.
That is Greek. Yes, that's the one part of mass is in a different language. That's in Greek. That's the one accepted. Yeah.
And anyway, however, the Latin mass has, which is the Latin mass that Margo and other Catholics will refer to, is the Tridentine Mass, which came out of the Council of Trent back in the 16th century, trying to deal with a lot of the issues that Luther and the other, and I use quotation marks here, reformers, were bringing up, because, well, let's face it, reformations don't lead to worse. But anyway, that's a whole nother issue. We're not going to go too much into that.
Much as my friends might be expecting me to go into that because of what I do on Twitter, not tonight.
Right. Yeah. That's a whole another thing, and I've never done a full-on episode on that. I really should sometime.
I've seen a few of those that you've done with some Protestants in the past.
It gets touched on here and there, but I've never really gone into it. So, okay, you've mentioned some of the differences, like which direction the priest faces, and obviously the fact that mass is in Latin, and there's some of the different there are differences with some of the prayers and everything, the translation. And I hesitate to focus too much on the quality of the translations, because it's obviously in different languages anyway. It's like I can definitely take a Latin mass and I can translate that into a deeper, more profound version of English if I want to.
Right, but here's the thing the thing I like about Latin instead of English, as we see with English, I mean, we've seen in current events, the English language is constantly getting updated. They just updated the dictionary last, like a few weeks ago, because with the whole avian coin hearings, they were updating.
Oh, goodness gracious, yes. Yeah, that's a whole new level.
The thing about Latin that is nice is that it's a dead language, and by dead, I don't mean like, oh, you never use it, it's dead, you just forget about it. It's dead, meaning that it's fixed, it's set in place, so it's never going to be updated. It's never going to change. Like, it is what it is. Like, these are the words. It's never going to be updated. You never have to try to find a different translation of it. Like, it's just like kind of set in stone, and that's kind of what I like about it. Whereas with English, the English language is constantly changing and being updated. And I mean, even back in, was it 2011, 2012, they updated the Novus Ordo, the translation of the Novus Ordo. They changed a lot of the different responses from "the Lord be with you," and instead of being "and also with you," it was changed in "with your spirit."
Although to be fair, that was actually making a more formal translation, a more faithful translation from the Latin.
Right, which is good, which is a good thing. But at the same time, like Latin, there is no updating. It's just Dominus vobiscum et cum spiritu tuo.
However, that's not entirely true, because the church actually has Latinists who do work on the language and adding new words and such to it as need arises. For example, there was no Latin word for computer at the time, but because
I don't think the word computer shows up in the mass.
No. But my point is, the language is still actually developing and evolving, although albeit much.
I'm talking about the liturgical. I'm sticking to liturgical Latin.
Well, you could do that with any language, though. You can literally say, this is just a translation. You're just gonna have to live with it.
Yeah, okay, but I'm talking about very narrow set, like, of Latin, like ecclesiastical Latin used for liturgy, used for prayers and stuff, not vernacular Latin that you would be speaking on the street. And just so everyone knows, I love Latin Mass. I cannot speak it fluently. I cannot speak Latin fluently.
and I would agree that it's obviously still changing a heck of a lot slower and at a more measured pace, and basically under the sole direction of the church, frankly, versus any other language. So I only bring that up just to amend the point a little bit, not to completely dismiss the point.
Okay.
Okay. So now that we have thoroughly confused everyone, Okay,
Feel the-
let's get into some of the things. Like, why do you think? Because obviously you have a preference for the Latin Mass. Almost, I would you say it's to the point of excluding the Novus Ordo, or just like
Yes.
I really don't want to?
Yes. I mean, unless there was a dire need for me to fulfill a whole day of obligation, and the absolute only mass I could get to fulfill the obligation under the pain of mortal sin, then I would settle for an ordinary form. But for me at this point, I'm basically exclusively Latin Mass. And actually, one of the points I wanted to bring up is one of the things that led me to that, because I just want to say a quick side story. I grew up in the ordinary form. I grew up in a very modern ordinary form with a lot of liturgical abuses, a lot of things that shouldn't have been done. And then I found a more reverent Novus Ordo, thankfully in college, and then back home. But then eventually what would happen is that I was trying to go back and forth between the ordinary form and the Latin Mass, or the Novus Ordo and the Latin Mass, and I was trying to follow both liturgical calendars. And for me, I'm someone who's like very anal about following like the liturgical calendar and like trying to follow it daily even. And so what I was trying to do, I was noticing that the two calendars didn't line up. And a perfect example actually happened this past Sunday, whereas in the Latin Mass, it was Christ the King Sunday, because in the Latin Mass, they retain that on the last Sunday of October, the Sunday right before All Saints' Day. And in the Novus Ordo, they adjusted it and they changed it and they pushed it to the last Sunday in November, or the last Sunday before Advent.
Before Advent, yeah.
So even right there, it's like you try to go to an ordinary form Mass or Novus Ordo Mass, and it's 30th Sunday of Ordinary Time, or something like that. It's one of the Sundays of Ordinary Time. And then in the Latin Mass, it's Christ the King. And it's just totally, completely different. I was like, wait a minute, I can't do this anymore. I can't be going back and forth, like 1 week doing this, 1 week doing that. Like, for me, it just got to be too much. And I just started seeing, like, there's so much different. It didn't even feel like the same. It didn't feel like the same Mass to me. And there was so much that, for me, was missing. I love the prayers that are at the Latin Mass. For me, like, that's really important, to just have the priest like just go straight to the altar, go straight and just stop praying right away. I don't want to be greeted when I'm at Mass, because when I'm at Mass, it's not about me at all. It's about Jesus and giving him as much reverence and honor that we can give him, because he is our King and he is right there present in the Eucharist. And no matter how reverent, you can make a Novus Ordo very, 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 very reverent. You can, but yet at the same time, you still don't have the last gospel reading at the end. You don't have the Asparagus May blessing at the beginning. You don't have the prayers before the altar. The readings are different. They completely changed the lectionary to take out the hard sayings of Scripture, to take out, they even took out the reading from First Paul, where he warns against receiving the Eucharist unworthily. They don't have that in the Novus Ordo ever. That's not part of the lectionary, because I don't know why.
I'm not sure that's true.
It's not. I've studied it. I've looked at the A, B, and C cycles of the Novus Ordo. It does not. You will search for it.
Maybe I've just read it so many times on my own.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, you should be on your own. But in the Mass, you should definitely have that. The Latin Mass has that scripture reading every year. And the Novus Ordo, you will never hear that warning about those who receive the body and blood unworthily receive damnation onto themselves, because they are profaning the Blessed Sacrament.
I might have to fact check you on that one.
Go ahead. You can,
I swear I've heard it, but maybe not. Maybe I've just read it so many times on my own that it's like, oh, of course it's that Mass. But maybe, I don't know.
Yes, I mean, so for me, I just started studying it, and I mean, I really studied it. I've compared the two forms, and for me now, I can't go back to the ordinary form unless, like, again, in a dire need, like if it's under the pain of mortal sin, which of course doesn't apply right now because there's the dispensation until COVID ends, maybe if COVID ends. But,
yeah.
So there's that whole thing that right now we're still, everything's kind of crazy.
Yeah, we'll have to talk after. I'm curious what the situation is there, but again,
that's a whole other story.
Yeah,
not good.
No.
I'm not happy about it. But yeah, I mean, so for me, and it's hard because I mean, I was raised in the Novus Ordo. That's how I was raised. It's how I received all my sacraments, baptism, confirmation, Eucharist, everything. So, I mean, and of course, I know there's the debate that I really don't want to get into, but there's a debate among Catholics about is the Novus Ordo even a valid mass? And for me, I still think it is.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that's all I really know. Because I mean, I'm not God. I can't definitively say one way or the other whether a certain form of mass is technically valid or not. I think that's for God to say, not us. Unless through the church, if the church one day were to declare something, then I mean, yes, because the church.
If the power of binding and loosing is valid, then yes, it is. Then yes,
the church could speak, but the church has not spoken one way or the other on what. I mean, I think the church pretty much has said.
I think the fact that the Novus Ordo Mass exists would argue against that.
But if a pope were to one day eventually rule it as invalid, I mean that's a possibility, but I don't want to say anything more than that. But yeah, so I mean, for me, I don't even know if I want to say for me. I don't want to say like, oh, it's just an opinion, it's just a preference, because I don't see it as a preference technically. I see it as like I want God to have, I want Jesus to have the maximum amount of reverence that we can possibly give him this side of heaven, and I see that at the Latin Mass. And I mean, again, I'm not disparaging any of the other rites of the church. The Byzantines have a beautiful liturgy. Oh my goodness, their liturgy is amazing. But at the same time, within the Latin rite, and that's the whole things that the Latin rite, as far as I know, is the only rite that has two forms of mass within the rite.
I think that is accurate. Yes.
Which is a strange thing. Like I want us all to be united. Really, like again, I want everyone to be united. That's one of my biggest pet peeves. Is like that. Right. There's so much division. Like everywhere you go, and even amongst Catholics, there's so much division. And it's just like, can we all just like agree on something? Is it possible for humans to agree on anything?
No.
Can we just all agree?
Let's face it. Ever since there were two people,
Adam and Eve, going back to them again.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like, we really shouldn't eat that, but I want to. Okay, how about I have some too? Okay, it's like, yeah.
It's all about what I want. I mean, that's the other thing too. It's like, it's not about what I want even necessarily, because I know that's another thing that drives a lot of things is personal preference and what you like, like, oh, I prefer this, I prefer that, this is what helps me. But there's gotta be some objectivity at a certain point too.
No, I understand what you're saying. It feels like this is just not like I understand what you mean by the difference between it's more than just a preference. It's like, no, this is what I should be doing, as opposed to this is what I prefer to do. So I completely get that. And I also, I mean, that comes out a lot in Catholic Protestant debates in general. And it is always interesting because I'm always like, I didn't choose I didn't choose the Catholic Church. I didn't figure it out and decide that it was right. I recognize that it was correct.
Yes, exactly.
Which is a different thing altogether.
Yes, and exactly.
But it's a different mindset anyway for your typical American to even kind of wrap your head around.
The typical American is all about, like, you hear the phrase church shopping and stuff, like, oh, like I'm going to try to find a church that like
the fact that phrase exists.
Yeah. I'm going to try to find a church that like fits me, that I like, that like that's welcoming and has a good band, or that has a good, like, I don't know, that has a good like sermon or something, or like, and then like, oh, if I don't like this pastor, I'm going to go to like someone else. And it's all based on just what I want. And then, I mean, that is typical for us Americans. Right. We want to just be happy, and we want to just do whatever we want, and we don't want anyone telling us what to do. But at a certain point, then, you have to reckon with God, with Christ saying in the gospel, like, unless you deny yourself and take up your cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. And that's one of the verses that I always come back to, is that, it's one of the hard verses. It's one of those verses where it's like, I have to die to myself. I have to die to literally myself. Like, I have to die to what I want to do. Like, and of course, like, being Catholic and stuff, it's like, I don't want to be told to carry a cross. Like, I don't like suffering. I don't want to suffer. I want comfort. I want pleasure. But I also have to be obedient to Christ. And so you have to try to find a way to balance that. So it's an interesting thing. And then the Latin Mass, like, going back to that, it's challenging. Like, I'm not gonna lie. Like, the first several times I went, it was hard. I didn't know what was going on.
That is the most common criticism of the Latin Mass in general.
But you have
literally
to
going back to Martin Luther.
Yeah, but like anything that's worth doing, you have to kind of push through it. You have to push through that unknown, and you just have to give it a chance. And also recognize that maybe you're not supposed to understand every single part of the Mass. Like, that's one of the things.
See, they're
Because it's supposed to be a mystery. I mean, like,
okay.
just like, can we understand the Trinity completely? No, we can't.
Okay,
the
there's a
Trinity.
difference though. There's a big difference though. There's a difference between certain things about God are just so dang mysterious. No, and you mind cannot wrap yourself around them.
But even the Mass, I mean, the Mass is so mysterious. Like the stuff that goes on, Jesus becoming the Eucharist, like the bread and wine becoming Jesus' body. Like, okay, I can't wrap my mind around that fully.
No, you can't, nor can anyone else. But that's not my point. My point is, why should it be intentionally left harder to even hear the word of what is going on? See, I don't think the fact that it's in Latin adds or subtracts from the mystery of the Mass. It, if anything, saying, well, it should be mysterious, so therefore we have a language that nobody knows. To me, that's obfuscating. That's not enhancing the mystery, it's obfuscating.
Can I say one thing?
Please.
I want to say that for me, like, I need to stop saying for me. When I go to Mass, I don't want it to be like anything else that I do in this world. Because when I step through the doors of the church, I want to go into another world, like, as literally as that can be. I mean, obviously I'm not in heaven, but I don't want it to be like the outside world. I don't want to hear this. I don't want to hear the common language. Okay, except in the homily. I'll give that one exception because, I mean, that would just be insane for the priest to give the homily in Latin, and then people would really be lost. But when I go to Mass, like, I want to have a transcendent, I want to have a language that's reserved just for the liturgy. I don't want to be hearing this English that I'm speaking right now, the language that I speak 6 of the 7 days of the week. I want to go somewhere where it's completely different, where it's an out of this world. It's a language that's reserved just for the Mass. And again, like, we have ecclesiastical Latin, which is a separate kind of Latin from the usual Latin. I want it to be completely different. I don't want it necessarily. And there's parts of the Mass too where the priest is speaking directly to Jesus, not to us. So when the priest speaks in a low voice at Latin Mass, and it's like people are like, oh, I can't hear what Father's saying. What does Father say? And it's like, that's okay. Because Father's not talking to you.
Those prayers specifically, they're not for you in the congregation.
I mean, those prayers are private between, like, the priest and Jesus, and it's okay. And part of the Latin Mass that is nice is that you don't necessarily need to follow along. You can follow along. Again, these booklets are really helpful. It really helped me a lot. But you definitely don't have to follow along. I mean, you know, the whole thing, like, where people pray the rosary during the Mass, or people do their own, like, silent prayers and stuff. And it's okay because you're just present there at the foot. You're present there. You're present at the foot of the cross as the holy sacrifice of the Mass. And I know the common thing is for people to be, like, following along and having the active participation as, like, participating. Sometimes active participation is really you just internalizing everything that's going on, you making it your own prayer, and you're kind of more internalizing it. It doesn't have to be always a call and response thing where people are getting up and lay people are all in the sanctuary. That's a whole other issue too that I have with the ordinary room, where you have, like, you know, everyone having roles or parts at Mass they have to do. You have women all around and stuff, which I think women shouldn't have roles at Mass. People are going to kill me for this, but I think that, you know, it should be the priests and then the deacons, subdeacon. That's a whole other thing. The minor orders that were suppressed, that we don't have subdeacons and acolytes anymore. And actually we used to have an order, like seminarians used to be lectors, instead of having lay people be the lectors. That's a whole other issue. But yeah, it's just supposed to be a much more just silent, prayerful time. And that's the whole other thing. There's a lot more silence at the Latin Mass than at the typical Novus Ordo. You can actually, like, breathe and pray more and actually focus more. Like, I know for me, it's been such a peaceful oasis. Like, I don't have to worry about, like, oh, what am I supposed to be doing here? What am I supposed to be doing here? Like, you can just kind of chill and relax. Like, you don't have to worry about, like, perfectly following along at every single point.
Now, first, because we're gonna get into some actually more specific questions and everything here in a minute. Now, first, I actually agree with most of the criticisms that are levied against the Novus Ordo Mass. It did. One of the biggest problems with it, I think, is the fact that it was such a significant change from the Latin Mass in such a short period of time.
Yes.
I think that caused an awful lot of confusion and unnecessary division within the church. It was a poorly handled, unnecessary mess.
Yes.
I think they would have been much better served to simply take the Latin Mass as it was and translate that into the vernacular.
Yeah,
keep all the forms. That's fine.
Yeah,
because
that's again,
fine.
I don't think we should be speaking the common language at Mass, except for the homily.
And you are free to say that. I don't see what the problem is, to be perfectly honest.
Because again, it's the outside world. It's the outside world coming in slowly and slowly. You have the language, you have this and that. Like, I don't think the outside world belongs in the church, because in the Mass, I mean, so Mass, Holy Sacrifice,
hold on.
That Calvary, you shouldn't just be speaking the common casual.
But it need not be the common.
Spanish.
It need not be the common casual usage of the language. It can be an elevated.
What's wrong with the Latin? And again, you can learn it. Like I
didn't say anything was. I didn't say anything was wrong.
You can learn it. You can follow along.
I didn't say. Margo, relax. I didn't say anything was wrong with the Latin. I actually agree with most of the things that will be said in favor of the Latin Mass, to be perfectly honest. My thing is actually, I see most of the debate between the two sides on that as everybody's focusing way too much on external factors. Because none of the language that is used in the Mass, the number of scripture readings, the direction of the priest facing, all of that. The specific prayers.
That's what matters to me.
Let's see, but none of that is doctrine of the church. What is doctrine of the church is the Eucharist.
Okay.
Is the fact that Jesus is there, present in the Eucharist.
Yeah,
that is what is central. That is what the Mass is all about.
You don't want to reduce.
Right there.
Yes, it's all about the Eucharist, but the external forms matter, because the lex quendi, lex oendi.
I'm not saying they don't matter. I'm not saying they don't matter. But I am saying that there is a problem with absolutizing them, because it's not as though, put it this way, I think in trad Catholic land, there's a tendency to treat the Tridentine Mass the same way certain fundamentalist Protestants treat the King James Bible, that as though it was handed down from on high by Jesus himself all at once. Not that anyone actually believes that, but I think people tend to treat it that way. And the fact is, the Mass did develop over time.
It developed, but it was never so radical.
No, I completely agree. I completely agree with it, and that is a huge problem. And like I said, it caused an awful lot of issues that did not need to be.
Yeah.
But we are in the world that we are in at the moment, and also, I don't think the fact that it was done stupidly, to be perfectly frank, I don't think that negates the possibility of there is a good way to do it, or there is a way to there's nothing to say that the Mass wouldn't organically develop into a different common language at some point, because it wasn't always in Latin. The scriptures weren't always in Latin. In fact, back when they first translated them into Latin, St. Jerome, thanks, there were many arguments about whether or not you should be translating the original Hebrew and Greek into the common vulgar vernacular of Latin. See what I mean? Do you see my point? I see many of the arguments as being almost exactly the same, and it's like, no, I don't think you can argue that it should never be. However, I do think the fact that it was done so rapidly with so many, and the changes to the externals were significant, and that is a problem. I completely agree with you on that.
Okay.
My only thing is, it's not that the externals should never change. I mean, you certainly could argue that no, this is the absolute apex. This is the perfect form, and here's all the reasons why.
Yes.
You can argue that, and I'm actually okay with that as a stance, but as it's kind of got to recognize that, okay, no, that is the stance that's being taken, while recognizing that it did develop. It's just, no, I just think that it just can't get any better than this. Beethoven was the best. Music is never going to get any better, and that's just the way it is. Nobody was ever going to paint better than Rembrandt, and there's never going to be a better natural law philosopher than Thomas Aquinas, and there was never a better pagan natural law philosopher than Aristotle, and that's just the way it is.
Yes.
And you can, so like I said, I'm okay with the argument that no, this just was the best. This is the absolute apex. You really can't do better.
Yes.
And I'm okay with that argument, to be honest.
Okay.
But to argue that that isn't usually the way that it's presented. The way it's usually presented is just, no, this is just the way it has to be. This is the way it always is. And I'm not specifically saying you. I'm saying trad Catholic in general. And there's little acknowledgement that there was a process to get there in the first place.
Well, of course there was a process.
Yeah. Like I said, people know that. Nobody believes that it was handed on high by Jesus, but a lot of people tend to act like it was.
Yes.
You see, just like most 99.9% of fundamentalist Protestants do not believe that Jesus came down, came from the resurrection straight out of the tomb and said, "Here's your King James Bible," but a lot of them act like it.
Yeah, I'm really liking Jake Wilson's comments that he's like, "Oh, what? The KJV is exactly how it was spoken in the New Testament times. Blasphemy." And then Ginger, today we have Cardi B, you're wrong. Checkmate. So I mean, he has a point there. Like, you can't really compare Beethoven to Cardi B.
No, you really can't. There is really no comparing the two. I completely agree with that statement.
You can kind of see how Beethoven is kind of a little bit superior to Cardi B. Not that I'm saying anything about Cardi B. Not that I'm trying to make an analogy.
No, apples and oranges.
Oh my gosh! I'm just enjoying Jake's commentary in the comments.
Oh yes. Okay, so all of that being said, basically, I do agree with a lot of the criticisms of the Novus Ordo. I agree with most of the things said in favor of the Latin Mass. I can even add a few. But now let's. I guess here's one question I would ask you: could you foresee the possibility of, like I said, taking the exact form of the Latin Mass and actually translating it into the vernacular, so long as it was, not the common whatever, water cooler language that you would typically use at work, so long as it was an elevated somewhere closer to, like, let's say for English, closer to Victorian English, I guess.
Victorian English.
Let's say Jane Austen English,
like all the B's and vowels.
That's King James Version English, but yes. Because you've got all the silence.
No,
you got all the prayers, all of it. It's just not in.
I know. Let's just go back to Aramaic. Like, let's just go back to what Jesus spoke, and like, let's just go all the way back to just Aramaic and Greek.
Hey,
let's just go all the way back.
Again, I'm fundamentally okay with that. As if the church were to say, that's what we're doing. All right, I guess it's going to be a steep learning curve, but okay.
For real. I think there are like versions of the Our Father that you can learn in Aramaic somewhere out there. I know like some some of my trad Catholic friends have mentioned like, oh, I might want to learn that sometime. Like, okay. I don't even know if I'd be able to pronounce it, but I mean, I just, there's something about Latin. Well, the Latin was the universal language of the church. It had special place in it. I mean, and even Vatican II is saying that, Latin still should retain, like, even, the Novus Ordo does retain Latin a lot, especially for the common mass parts, like the Sanctus and, I'm not sure about the Gloria. Sometimes I've gone to some Novus Ordos that have the Gloria in Latin, but the Agnus Dei, Lamb of God, you often hear that in Latin. So, I mean, Latin does have a preferred place. So, I mean, I'd be hesitant to move away from it.
But would you consider that to be something at least worth doing? An experiment, or let me rephrase the question. If you walked into your Latin Mass parish and, like, for some reason they were doing the Latin Mass, but in English, would you storm out and stomp your feet?
I would talk to the pastor afterwards and ask him why.
What's going on? No,
yeah,
that's fair.
because the norms for the Latin Mass, I mean, it's called the Latin Mass. It's literally called the Latin Mass, or the Tridentine Mass, I guess you could say. But the fact that it's called the Latin Mass and stuff would be a little weird for it to be the Latin English Mass. Mm-hmm. And I think, though, these are just attempts. I know there's just so much, like, you hear about the concept of the reform of the reform. And you hear about, like, trying to make it more and more relevant. But my question always with that is, at what point is it enough? Like, where does it stop with the Novus Ordo? Like, when do you stop trying to make the Novus Ordo better, or try to stop making it more relevant? Like, what's the ultimate goal? Like, where do you draw the line? What's the ultimate goal? And at a certain point, won't it just kind of become the Latin Mass all over again? I mean, at a certain point, if you just keep trying to add incense back, you add the Latin back, you add chanting back, you add this, that, and the other thing, and then eventually, don't you just get back to square one?
You could actually make that argument. Yeah, I think,
go back to where you started, kind of thing.
I think, in all honesty, if I were to have my druthers, we would have vernacular Mass in what is mostly the old Tridentine rites, with probably a few tweaks here and there. Like, I think it's a good thing that we have 3 scripture readings as opposed to 2.
There are arguments in favor of, because I know
more scripture is not bad.
Well, it's not. But Mass is not supposed to be a Bible study either. Like, a lot of people think that Mass is supposed to be a Bible study. I mean, that's, and then especially because eventually, like, in the 60s and 70s, we're trying to appeal more to our Protestant brothers and sisters. And they, they're better with us at the Bible. I would definitely give them credit for that. But we, at the Latin Mass, for that lectionary, it might not be more scriptural, but the scripture is more impressed on you. Like, and in the daily readings, will often be the same as the Sunday readings, so that way you internalize it more. You memorize that scripture more instead of jumping around and having all these different scriptures and stuff. It's just the set readings, and the readings repeat every single year. It's one cycle, as opposed to the ABC, the 3-year cycle, and the Novus Ordo. It's just the one cycle, so you get the same readings year after year. Kind of what's coming, and they fit to the seasons, they fit to the saint feast days throughout the year. And so, I don't know, I don't see it as bad. There's just the epistle. Usually it's the epistle and gospel. It's just, one of Paul's letters and then the gospel reading. I don't see it as a bad thing, because, I mean, again, Catholics should read the Bible on their own. Absolutely, positively. Like, yes, that's the common misconception, is that Catholics don't read their Bibles. And I know that for a while Catholics were really bad at that, and Catholics, I think they did rely on the Mass too much sometimes. They were like, oh, I'll just see what at Mass, I don't need to read on my own. Yeah. Like, no, you need to read the Bible. Like, I think St. John who said, like, ignorance of scripture is ignorance of Christ. Something along those lines. Might be paraphrasing.
That is exactly correct.
So yeah, I mean, you should be reading scripture on your own. You shouldn't be relying too much on the Mass. But I don't necessarily see it necessarily as a bad thing, because I think that you should be taking that on your own. And I don't know. I'm not one. I don't like a lot of change. I think that you should have just left the Mass alone. It was fine. It was fine the way it was. I mean, it wasn't broken. I don't think the Mass really was really broken. I think what was needed in the 1950s, 60s, 70s was catechesis. And catechesis on a whole lot of areas of theology, not just in terms of the Mass, but in terms of a lot of things, because we saw how a lot of things went off the rails in the 80s and 90s and even to the 2000s. And now you wonder, like, kind of explains why we have Catholics like Pelosi and Biden, because catechesis just sucked. But I think, especially in terms of the liturgy, why couldn't we have just taught people about the liturgy? Why couldn't we have just explainined the Mass to people, the Trinity Mass to people, instead of just radically bringing in all these changes all at once.
Here
Why
is
couldn't
some
we
of
just
the
explained
problem.
it?
Well, here's part of the problem. In what context do you explain it?
And what I mean, the same context they explain anything. I mean, of course, kind of nowadays we have the benefit of the internet. They didn't have that in
Well,
the
well,
20th
yeah, then
century. So I mean, you have more opportunities
the
to
fact
teach things now. But I mean, just within the parish life, the priest could have had like demonstrative masses. I guess I've gone to a few of those for the Novus Ordo, where I've had priests go through the Novus Ordo step by step and explain things. I think the priest definitely could have done that within like the Latin Mass. Maybe have what they call a dry mass, where they don't consecrate the Eucharist or anything, but they can just explain it like, this is why we do this. This is why this.
And those are good. The problem is not many people show up to these sorts of things.
Well, then it's on the people. That's unfortunate. That's on the people.
But
then,
at the same time,
at least if you offer it.
Yeah.
At least if you offer it, that's what I'm saying. Like, it should at least been offered.
Well, and a lot of these things are offered. But again, not many people show up to them, which is unfortunate. And it's also but there's also lots of good reasons why people don't show up to them. Because for myself, I've got a job and 6 kids. Guess what? I don't have a lot of time for extracurricular activity, especially on someone else's schedule.
But that's why, like, I'm talking about, like, back then, the 50s and 60s, you offer it at a parish. Nowadays, of course, podcasts, books, articles. Like, I mean, in the 21st century.
But my point is, the context where you can reach the most people to teach people about these things is really within the Mass.
Well, then you have the pastor doing the homily, or you have it in the bulletin or something. I mean, I know who reads the bulletin.
Nobody reads the bulletin.
Okay. Maybe I'm a nerd.
If there is a bigger waste of trees on the planet than church bulletins, I challenge you to show it to me.
Okay, so maybe not the bulletin, but like, you know, within the homily, that also the priest can like have like, you know, a few minutes just to explain one part each week or something, or can go through it step by step that way then or something, or you know, a few minutes before Mass, it can be like, I'm just going to explain this part of the Mass this week. Next week, we'll talk about this part of the Mass. And you just have a series of that. And it's just a few minutes before Mass or a few minutes after Mass or something. I don't know. But, you know, just something like that. Or over, like, you know, Catholics go get donuts after Mass sometimes. Like, you often will have the Donut Sunday thing. Even my Latin Mass has that after the Sunday morning Mass. So even over donuts, the priest can, I mean, that sounds kind of bad, but like in the social time, the priest can just explain one part of the Mass while people are kind of sitting down and enjoying their post Mass breakfast or something. I know, but then
now all of those are great, but
I'm just
in a way, and that's fine. But in a way, you sort of made part of my point, which is that again, within the Mass is the context where you're going to reach the most people. So therefore, in a sense, at least sometimes the Mass is in fact going to be a Bible study.
Well,
at least for the first part, the liturgy of the Word is going to, in a sense, be at least in part, a Bible study. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Not necessarily, but the lectionary, there was nothing wrong with the lectionary necessarily. Like, I don't think you needed to go through and add a 3-year cycle. I'm sorry. I don't think that was a necessary change.
It may or may not be necessary, but you also really can't argue that it's bad.
I mean, there's pluses and minuses to both. I guess I'll just say that.
And I think that's a fair statement.
Yeah. Like one of the quotes from one of the books I've been reading, I just want to pull out this one quote because I thought that it was really helpful to me. I'm just going to read this one quote is, the old lectionary, as limited as it deliberately is, demonstrate. I cannot talk tonight. Features more of the tough sayings of Scripture. It is not afraid to present the wrath of God, the evil of sin, or the danger of sacrilegious communions. The kind of passages that are frequently left out of the new lectionary, in spite of its much greater size. In other words, the new lectionary suppresses parts of Scripture that are difficult to the modern man.
Well, and then by all means, correct the lectionary. I'm fine with that. You know, I am in no way, shape, or form wedded to the externals of the Novus Ordo, because again, I recognize them as externals, and externals, literally, even though I think it would be a bad idea, but literally, the Pope could wake up tomorrow and change every external in the church, and
Ooh,
Well,
don't say
this
that.
guy might. I probably shouldn't. I probably
Yeah,
should be
don't say
careful.
that. We don't
I
know
should be
what's
really
gonna
careful.
happen.
But the point is, technically, he could and would absolutely break nothing in terms of in terms of the fundamentals of the faith, because they're externals, they're incidentals. Which calling them incidental may be too reductive. But the point is, they're not central to the faith. They can change, and so you don't have to point out any specific fault of the Novus Ordo for me and say, see, that's bad. Like, okay, all right, yeah, agreed, fix it.
Well, it was I would if you have to fix it, like the Latin Mass already has the fix was already there. The problem is that the Novus Ordo took the things out, so in order to fix it, you'd just be reverting
To a
to
large
the Mass as
degree.
it
To a large
was.
degree. Kind of like I was saying, if I could have my druthers, I would see something of a fusion of what I see are the best elements of
I think.
both.
Have you been to an Anglican ordinate? I think what is it, the
I have
Anglican
not.
ordinate Mass? Because
I have
from
not.
what I've heard, that is basically what you're talking about. Because it takes the Anglican ordinate, I think it takes like basically the best of like the two masses and does kind of fuse them together, and it's in English. So for all those people who don't want to hear,
That'd be interesting. Of course, fighting an Anglican rite parish is virtually impossible. They are
I think
like
it's easier to find a
maybe
Latin Mass parish.
there may be like a half a dozen of them
Yeah.
in the country. Quickly for the audience, what Margo's referring to is the Anglican rite that came to existence in the church under John Paul II. Basically, when the Anglicans started allowing homosexual priests, a lot of Anglicans were like, all right, that's enough. We're out of here. Back to Rome. And so there were a lot of discussions and everything with with the Vatican, and basically what they came to was there would be a separate rite created in the church, which is basically they would retain most of their actual the forms and everything of their mass. I'm sure it was amended to some degree or another. I'm not sure.
I haven't
to
studied
what
that
degree.
super intensely, so I don't know all the specifics about the Anglican ordinance.
Right.
I just know
a lot
in general.
a lot of the priests, a lot of the Anglican priests of those parishes, in fact, a lot of entire parishes came over, as a matter of fact, and those priests were ordained as Catholic priests. And yeah, basically it is. I have heard many good things said about the Anglican liturgy, and it was a special deal. So, and it's also incidentally, if you ever hear of a married Catholic priest, they're probably part of the Anglican rite.
Yes, that's the one
certainly
exception. And that's a whole other topic too, celibacy, whether or not I'm very pro celibacy. Again, being a Chad, I'm very pro, like, priests should make that sacrifice. Priests should definitely make the sacrifice. So some Catholics who think that no, celibacy should be abolished, priests should be married. And for me, it's like in very limited circumstances. Again, like if someone who was a priest in was an Anglican priest, and then he wants to convert to Catholicism, I mean, well, then in that case, I'm not going to tell him to divorce his wife, because that would also be wrong. So in that case, yes, but I'm not in favor of just totally opening wide the door to just, yes, priests can be married. And speaking as a woman, because a lot of people, like, it's a lot of men who talk about it, but speaking as a woman personally, I just want to say, I don't want to be married to a priest. Like, I wouldn't want my husband to be a priest, because that's just a little too much.
I can't imagine it would be a party at all.
It would just be like, wait a minute, like, I'm married to you, and then I'm seeing you like consecrate the Eucharist, and then also like you're hearing confessions, and it just would get way too much for me. Right. It's like, just speaking as a woman, someone who could be a wife, like, no, I wouldn't want to be a wife to a priest. No, and I think priests should just be like fully available to serve at any time, to be able to get up at 3 a.m. and go, anoint the sick and, hear a dying person's confession or something.
That would be another fun one to do an episode on sometime. Yeah. It's like, why on earth are priests celibate, and how did that come to be?
See? I'm giving you ideas, Ginger.
Well, and a good Protestant will go and point out, well, Peter was married. Yes, accurate. But
we don't know if his wife was actually alive, though. It just says Peter's mother-in-law.
Who cares? But my point would be, who cares? That's a speculative point. And the fact is, on the best available data, he was probably married. And again, who cares? It doesn't matter. Which is one of the things. It's not a matter of doctrine. It's a matter of discipline, and so it's
that's
one of
a whole
those.
other show too that you could do too. Is the whole doctrine versus discipline thing.
Oh
like
yeah,
things that can change, because that's a big misconception that I've seen come up when I've had conversations with non-Catholics. Is they mistake the two and they kind of conflate them, and they think that certain things like, oh, that changed, so that proves that the church can change its teachings and stuff. And
it's like no. Let me explain it to you. But to be fair, I mean, I get how it is confusing and everything, especially if you're coming at it. It's basically it's a different mindset and everything, and it's one of the hardest. One of the things that I've really noticed in Catholic Protestant debates is it's really hard for the Catholic to communicate the right to communicate their mindset to the Protestant that they're discussing things with, because it is a different way of looking at it really is a different way of looking at the world in general.
Which and obviously it's interesting because you're the convert and I'm the cradle Catholic. So I mean, I've never not been Catholic. I mean, there was a time in high school, there was like a year in high school when I wasn't going to mass at all, and I didn't know what I was because I didn't understand the faith, but I was never a Protestant. I never would have called myself a Protestant completely. Whereas you have that perspective of being a formal Protestant. That's how you. So I mean, you had to go through that mindset change.
I recognize the differences in the mind in the mindset because I've had them. I mean, I've been
you had to switch.
Well, and I've been, shall we say, around the spiritual block a little bit more. Like, of course, I was raised nominally Protestant, and I did a brief stint as an atheist. Did a brief stint as part of what I now look back on as that was a borderline new age, a borderline new agey, borderline cult that was gestating in the egg there, and then kind of back to a nominal Protestantism, then to kind of Christian flavored agnosticism, which I think describes most people in the country, to be honest. And then, of course, now Catholic. So I've had a lot of different mindsets.
And I mean, you have a few years on me too. So I mean, you're a bit older than I am. So I mean, you have that much more experience than I have. So
that does say something. And being in the Navy, I've met and worked close. Oh yeah, worked closely with people from around. Oh, okay. Well, now you know. And but I met and worked closely with people from around the country and everything. So you see a lot.
Oh yeah.
Not all of it good, incidentally. But it's another story altogether. But so back to the topic at hand. And we're actually already a little over an hour. But I do think I should actually put in sort of my plug actually for Latin, and that is there is a lot of value that I see in having one form of mass in one language throughout the world, because anyone can go anywhere, and if you've got your Latin to whatever your vernacular is missal with you, you can follow along what's going on and know exactly what's happening, even if you don't have it, because that's what you see all the time. Even if you don't know the language, you know what's happening.
Yes, exactly. And just for anyone who's curious, we don't mean missile. By missile, we don't mean like the thing that you use to hit other people.
Not a projectile weapon.
MISSAL. It's a book of prayers. So don't freak out or anything. We're not Latin Mass is not a place where we're shooting off missiles or anything.
Keywords, tricky phrases, Catholic edition. But I do see an awful lot of value there, and there were of course a lot of reasons why, and that is one of the major reasons why the Mass stayed strictly in Latin for as long as it did, specifically because of that sense of unity throughout the world, and also part of the reason why it was slow to change was kind of something that Margo you were kind of getting at, and that was, well, originally, because the vernacular languages, they were young back in the back in the 15th, 16th century. A lot of them were still working on developing the sophistication necessary to communicate the truths and everything within Scripture, to communicate the meaning and everything. And that was part of why the church was so reluctant to translate even the Bible into vernaculars for a long time. Although, as I've pointed out in other debates, the church actually was well ahead of any proto-Protestants in making those vernacular translations. In fact, we've literally invented languages so that people could have it. Could have we've taken spoken languages and turned them into written languages. If you've heard of Cyrillic.
Yes,
Cyrillic is named after Saint Cyril. He and his brother Methodius took a spoken language, turned it into a written language, specifically so the people could have the scriptures in their own language.
Yes.
So anyway, but in any case, there were reasons why the church was very slow to adopt the vernacular in general, and I think there were a lot of very good reasons for that. Now, do I think that I clearly don't think that it's that by itself is justification for never having the mass in the local vernacular. However, like I said, there's good reasons for it. I see a lot of the value in it. At the same time, I also see value in anyone being able to walk off the street and it's their first mass. They've never been to one before, and being able to at least hear the words and understand, okay, they pray like this. These are the prayers they say, and so not that you can't look it up, but it's different than but it's different when you're there.
But there's also the element of beauty and stuff. I mean, I've heard stories from people who have never gone to Latin Mass and don't know Latin at all, but then they're just so taken away by just the beauty and just the reverence and stuff, and just how beautiful it is. Like, they didn't mind that they didn't completely know what was being said, because they were just like, whoa, this is just.
And I've heard a lot of those stories. I have. I've been to a few Latin masses. I've never had that profound, moving experience. I just haven't. And for whatever, who knows why? I don't know. One was like, well, it was probably an indult mass, and it was so what?
Come to if you're ever in Chicago, you definitely need to check out St. John Cantius in Chicago, because that is just.
I think I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's just one of the most beautiful, just objectively beautiful churches. I don't know if I want to say in the entire country. I'm sure there's others. But it is just one of these churches that it's breathtaking. Like, it's one of those kind of one of those destination churches if you want to check out. And the interesting thing about St. John Cantius is they offer the Novus Ordo in English, they offer the Novus Ordo in Latin, and then they also offer the extraordinary form Latin Mass, Tridentine Mass, whatever you want to call it. They offer all three of those different versions of Mass, so like kind of something for everyone. When I've gone there, I've gone for the Latin Mass. It's also nice too, because the Latin Mass is at 12:30 in the afternoon, and I live like an hour away, so that one's like the easiest for me to get to, and it also happens to be the Latin Mass, so it works out pretty well.
Works out nicely, yes.
Whereas the other ones are like earlier in the morning, and I'm not a morning person at all.
I have noticed generally on Twitter when you post about going to Mass, it's always late in the day.
Oh yes, I'm very spoiled. I mean, COVID stuff aside, my Latin Mass is usually at 5:30 in the afternoon, and it's like 10 minutes from my house. So I do have to say that I am very undeservedly spoiled, blessed. I don't deserve that. I guess Jesus is like, okay, how to get Margo to Mass. She's not a morning person. I guess
morning person. Yeah.
I'll just let her have the 5:30 in the afternoon Mass. And I'm just like, this is kind of amazing, because I mean, I hear of other people and they're like waking up at the crack of dawn and have to drive like an hour and a half away to get to Mass, and I'm just to get to the Latin Mass. I'm just like, yeah, this one 10 minutes, and it's Latin, and it's in the afternoon, so I can just sleep on the morning on Sunday. Right. I can roll out of bed at like 9 or 10 in the morning on Sunday mornings.
Now, I will say any lack of profound experience that I've had is not because of the lack of beauty in the church that I've been to a Latin Mass in, because the local parish that actually does Latin Mass on a regular basis, it's actually very old school, very
Okay.
very beautiful on the inside.
Nice.
In the fact that they do the Latin Mass, obviously the priest's pretty old school.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's no lack of any of that. In fact, actually, the closest where I've had an experience, the closest I've had to an experience like that with the Latin Mass was actually not in a proper church at all. It was a local Protestant college, actually. The single largest religious group there is actually Catholics.
What? Wait, the largest group at a Protestant college?
Hey,
how does that work?
We've got weird demographics.
Okay.
And technically, they're not an officially Protestant college anymore, but
okay.
Regardless, and there's actually a Catholic society there, and they put on a Latin Mass.
That's awesome.
They put on a Latin Mass there at the place where they typically do Sunday Mass, and they did given the space that they had to work with, they did a fantastic job. But I don't put too much stock in any sort of experience, in any sort of minor experience I might have had, because it was mostly the choir they had singing was amazing, and I'm like, well, the choir singing could be beautiful anywhere, and theoretically in any language, although there is a certain inherent beauty to Latin that I will certainly grant.
Yes. And Gregorian chant was actually developed for Latin, like with the beat and with the meter of Latin, the rhythm of the Latin language.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the reasons why. Yeah, the meter and everything, the rhythm that's one of the hardest things to translate anyway. Yes. When you're translating into another language, I mean, that's poetry is notoriously difficult to translate for that reason. But in any case, I do see much value in the Latin Mass, and if frankly, and obviously this isn't going to happen, but if Pope Francis woke up tomorrow morning and said, you know what, Latin Mass for everybody, I'd be, well, okay, cool, I'm good with it. I actually would be annoyed if he woke up and said, no Latin Mass for anybody.
Oh gosh,
that would bother me, and it would, technically within his rights to make that call, technically. However, that doesn't mean it's a good call.
Yeah, I think you would see a lot of tumult, even more than we have right now.
It would be awful, and not to mention, to repudiate, 2,000 years of church history would just be a stupid idea.
Yeah,
which is like why would you do that? That would make no sense, because it is throwing it kind of in the face of, again, the entire history of the church, the entire in small t tradition of the church, which does still matter. It's not big T, it's not sacred tradition, but it's a very sacred small t tradition.
Yes.
And I realize I just confused the ever-living hell out of every non-Catholic that's watching right now.
Shout out to all the Protestants who are watching and who are just ridiculously confused.
Why are sometimes... What is this small t, big T nonsense?
I'm just imagining my Twitter DMs right now probably just exploding, and they're probably just like, what are you talking about? What is gonna probably have like all these tweets and all these mentions, probably.
That's another whole episode, getting into what exactly we mean by sacred tradition. And to be fair, it is notoriously difficult to... I think it's difficult to adequately define. If I'm being honest, I've never found what I think is a fully satisfying definition of it.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's just like it's the passing down. It's just the passing down of like teachings through the centuries, and just through it's the all passing down of traditions that might not all fully be fleshed out in the Bible. I don't want to say that too loudly, because the Protestants might not like.
Yeah, I don't want to get too much into that, because it's a boy.
I have to resist. I have to learn how to resist. I'm really bad at resisting.
Oh, I know. But the big rabbit trail there.
Yes.
Okay.
We can just talk about this. Can go for like 6 hours, right? We can just pull it on night or just have like a 6-hour conversation about everything.
We easily could, but work tomorrow would just suck.
Yes, yeah. work. I'd be like, oh, what am I doing? What? I need more coffee.
So I think actually, though, I think we actually should about wrap it up. So if you
Yeah,
got any further, yeah, please.
Could I just give some book recommendations? Because I just have
Please
a few
do.
books
Yes.
I want for people who want to learn more. And if they're very confused on stuff, I just want to give them recommendations on things that really helped me. So the first one is this red book that I've been kind of flashing up a few times. This is, I think it was like $10. This is one of the basic standard translation missals that you'll see at Mass. You can also get it off Amazon for like $10. It's the Latin English booklet missal, and it just kind of walks you through. It has a few pictures and stuff, and it just kind of walks you through the Mass and gives you the side-by-side translation. And also, like, on the sides, it also explains like what's going on and why the priest is doing a certain thing, like why is he washing his hands, why is he dipping his hands into this bucket thing. So it goes through, it kind of has a few explanations. It just has the prayers side by side. So that's been really helpful. It's just the Latin English booklet missal. Then another book that I found that's been really helpful, it's very academic. It's pretty long, but it just walks you through the development of the Latin Mass. And it's called the Traditional Mass, and it's by Michael Friedowitz, and it's a very detailed history of the development of the Latin Mass. So kind of like we just touched on it briefly on like the medieval and on the Tridentine and how it came out of the Council of Trent. This goes into big detail on it. So I definitely recommend that. And then one other book I found that's really good, and one author I found who is really helpful, is Dr. Peter Krasniewski. This is his newest book called Reclaiming Our Roman Catholic Birthright, the Genius and Tradition of the Traditional Latin Mass. And again, he goes through, and he is a collection of a lot of his articles that he's expanded over the years. And he gives all the different arguments that Ginger has raised and kind of refutes them. And he has some fun fictional letters between him and then like devil's advocate, people playing devil's advocate. And he'll like write responses to people who give the best arguments in favor of the Novus Ordo, then he'll respond. So very good book. And then his last book that I've been reading too is smaller, Tradition and Sanity by Dr. Peter Krasniewski, Conversations and Dialogues of a Post-Conciliar Exile. Again, just walks you through different chapters on different parts of the Mass, and just will really help you understand the whys and why do we do this at Mass, and again, kind of going into the development, but it's much shorter, so much easier read, I would say, than the other two. But those have just been very helpful. And then also, I'm going to say his name, even though I know his name is very like polarizing to Catholics, but I have genuinely learned a lot from Dr. Taylor Marshall and his YouTube videos. I don't agree with him on everything. We have some disagreements, but he has made some very good YouTube videos in the past on attending the traditional Latin Mass, especially when he has Eric Sammons on the show. If you look for Taylor Marshall and Eric Sammons, they do a walkthrough of the Latin Mass where they'll explain step by step each part. So I recommend that. And yeah, I just encourage everyone watching and anyone who's watching in the future to just keep an open mind and, read about it, and don't be afraid of the Latin necessarily.
I can't disagree with any of that. So anyway, I hope that it was at least interesting. I hope the conversation was somewhat educational. Like I said, like I said at the beginning, we kind of blew right past a lot of the basics, and we just like right into the swamp and the weeds and all of that jazz. A little bit of intra-Catholic baseball, I guess you could say.
Yes.
Lot of keywords, tricky phrases. But I hope it was interesting. I hope it was somewhat educational.
And please feel free to anyone watching, if you want to reach out to me on Twitter if you're super confused and you have questions that didn't get answered. My Twitter handle is right there. I'm Margo Catholic, very easy to remember. Feel free to follow me. I tweet a lot on Catholicism and also on the Daily Wire a lot because I'm very interested in conservative politics, and especially about my favorite commentator, Michael Knowles. I have a lot of tweets about him and his show, and Matt Walsh, and the rest of them. And yeah, so I just hope that you guys learned a little something, and just stay open-minded to all the non-Catholics out there. Stay open-minded. You never know if Catholicism is true. If it is, encourage you to keep praying to the Holy Spirit and just allow Him to lead you to the fullness of truth.
There you go. Well said. All right. And thanks everybody for tuning in. There were actually a lot more people in the chat than frankly I expected for a bit of highly technical inter-Catholic baseball.
Yeah, it seems like Varric stuck around
cool.
for the most part. So thank you, Varric. And I saw him at my friend Matea's class at one point, and Jake Wilson, and Rob Knox.
Yep.
You said that you know who Rob Knox is.
It's Rob Noxious.
Oh, hello, Rob Noxious, my beloved Protestant friend.
It didn't click at first, and then
me either. Then I was like, oh. Then I said it out loud. I was like, Rob Knox. Oh, that guy.
And for anyone else who might tune in afterwards, thank you much. And do all the social media things, the liking, the sharing, and the subscribing, and all that.
Share, click the thumbs up, all that fun stuff.
Whatever it is.
Smash the like button.
No, I do not say that.
Smash it.
No, I hate that.
Come on, you're not a true YouTuber.
That is so cringe.
If you do not say that, then you are not a true YouTuber, Ginger. Come on.
Then that's okay. That's fine. And I'll never be a true YouTuber. And if that's what holds me back from fame and fortune, so be it.
Come on.
And in case, again, tune in to Red's show tomorrow night on Blunt Talk. She will be throwing that up on Twitter, I'm sure. And then Sunday night, I'll be back with a whole bunch of the Fighting the Void crew talking about that upcoming weird thing called an election. And then I'll have a post-election show on Wednesday with Cullen. So anyway, thanks again for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. And I definitely enjoyed being back in the saddle here on Fighting the Void. And we will see you next time. And until then, keep fighting.